Hi, my name is Özgür Yılmaz. I am doing my doctorate in the Department of Journalism at Istanbul University. I am 28. I think that the fields of political science and communication studies have become closer to each other on many issues recently. Therefore, I will try to prove this thesis through the concepts I have determined. That's why I am recording this podcast. I hope you find listening. Our first concept today is magical Marxism. The concept of magical Marxism is a concept introduced by Andy Merrifield. Merrifield states that she is trying to renew Marxism with this concept. The concept of magical Marxism comradely pits a fantastic, dreamy Marxism against scientific and sober versions of Marxism, and in doing so exposes the guilt of bourgeois society. The concept is not a deeper Marxism but a broader, more versatile, more flexible Marxism. Merrifield states that the concept arises from a double dissatisfaction, an obvious dissatisfaction with the world and a more subtle dissatisfaction with actually existing Marxism. The concept arose from the belief that these two were closely related, that the understandable pessimism of the period equally contaminated Marxism. Magical Marxism imagines a Marxism that is not just about critical analysis, but is freed from discussions about the role of class and state and the dictatorship of the proletariat. Similarly, she envisions a Marxism that no longer says scientific and has given up on the distinction between form and content, appearance and essence. The concept dreams of a Marxism that moves away from materialism rather than abandoning it, changing gears and advocating a freer and more spiritual political vision and a more imaginative radicalism. Magical Marxism imagines a Marxism that opens the horizons of the affirmative and extends beyond the dour realism of critical negativity. Magical Marxism demands more from Marxism, something more interesting, perhaps even more radical. The political agenda of Magical Marxism is to combine Marxism with the post-Seattle school of activism. It stays very challenging for this new perspective, especially in terms of maintaining resistance to neoliberalism and corporatization of everyday life. Magical Marxism emphasizes the enthusiastic and mysterious health of a reality pushed beyond or almost beyond all reason. While it explores the dizzying subcontinent of the dream of secret desire, it also clearly reaches to utopia, the effective politics of hope. Marxism has a tremendous magical power to invent, to create its own values and ethics, the quest for a higher, better and more durable ethics than the hollow values that insist on the sanctity of free market individualism are the quest of magical Marxism. The double determination of poetry and the future abounds in magical Marxism. The best examples of this are perhaps lyric poets, but people who do not necessarily write poetry but somehow lead poetic lives, who are poets in the full sense of the word, who, as Deleuze might have said, intensify and internalize strong emotions and poetic values can also be given as examples. The key point here is that Marxists turn life into poetry, adopting a creative as well as critical attitude towards life. Walter Benjamin called it dialectical fairy tale and constructed a perspective that destroyed the hardened ideas of freedom and pushed poetic life to its final possible limits, that is, towards a poetic politics. Subcomandante Marcos in Chiapas, jungle of Mexico, advocated similarly poetic politics. In the 1940s, French and Caribbean surrealists followed in Benjamin's footsteps, as did intellectuals such as André Breton and Benjamin Perret, as well as the Martinique Marxist poet Aim César, who argued in the pages of Tropiques that true civilizations were poetic shocks. Magical Marxism shows little patience for the statu quo and proclaims what André Breton and the surrealists proclaimed in the 1920s: power of absolute incongruity and spectacular unreality. It is a belief that helps propel magical Marxism into the future, an invented future from the spontaneous outpouring of powerful emotions, dragging present reality with it, leaping across the ontological gap between here and there, now and there. Magical Marxism will look to emulate the fantasy world of magical realism, positing an intellectual and political project in which resistance requires poetic transformation of reality, where power is not seen as neutralized, where society is not so much a force as a society. Magical realism has actual reality as its inspiration, but transforms this stark reality into fantasy, fantastic and imaginary subjective visions that become more real than objective reality itself. At this point that the concept of magical Marxism enters the intersection of political science and communication studies through the perspective of cultural studies, which examines the cultural. The second topic we will talk about is Carlos Slim. Carlos Slim has ranked first on Forbes list of the world's richest people 3 times. Carlos Slim, a Mexican business person, has been active in the telecommunication industry since the early 1990s. It is known that Slim runs in 18 countries of Latin America. In addition to the telecommunication companies he owns, Slim has an important place in the media environment in his country with his retail and construction companies. Like every powerful media figures, Slim is associated with acts of censorship and monopoly. Raimundo Riva Palacio, a veteran Mexico City journalist, said that after he wrote a column in El Universal newspaper in 2006 accusing Slim of being a monopolist, a Slim advisor threatened to remove newspaper ads from his companies. Considering that Slim controls most of the advertising agencies in the country, this cannot be dismissed as a simple threat. Slim made his fortune by buying up struggling companies and turning them around, but in 1990s, he became one of the world's biggest billionaires when he purchased Telefonos de Mexico, known as the Mexican telephone monopoly Telmex, from the government. Critics emphasized close ties with the government, saying his winning bid of 176 billion was above market price. Slim's Telmex control more than 90% of the local landline market and 70% of the mobile phone market. Slim also owns approximately 17% of the New York Times, making him its largest shareholder. Like other American news organizations, the Times rarely reports on his and other Mexican oligarchs' power to influence tax policies and public investments. In this state, Slim is one of the symbols of the monopolization in the field of media and communication. Our third topic is gendered mobility. Mobility is not gender neutral, as people have different routine activities. Women's daily work includes not only work obligations, but also family and home care. Women spend more time than men on home and child care, especially in low and middle income countries. Everyday mobility, in its broadest sense, is perhaps the mark of late modernity. Despite improvements in public transport and the greater speed, comfort and range of services available during commuting, time is still a limited resource for most people in the labor market. As can be seen, gendered mobility generally gives a definition regarding public transportation in daily life. However, when viewed from a broader perspective, immigration and labor issues come to the fore. Migration, a physical and social process, is also a means of cultural dissemination and social integration. But most earlier studies on migration have focused on the economic aspect of migration. Often framed through men's experiences, such research ignores women's role in it. Census data show a gradual increase in female migration, with a slight decline in the 1990s, when overall migration also decreased. The average annual growth rate of the immigration population over the last 30 years was 2.12%, an increase of 2.24% for female migration compared to 1.85% for males over the same period. While women in rural areas are the most mobile, the proportion of urban women has also increased in recent years. Migrant women affect the labor map in the region by working as seasonal, temporary, or permanent workers in the regions they go to. Our fourth concept is Clender. The concept of Clender was first used by Eric Olin Wright. The concept draws attention to the fact that the experiences of women in the working class are different from the experiences of male workers. The work is composed of class and gender. Here, there is an attempt to produce a class concept suitable for gender discussions. The concept of class emphasizes the process by which gender is incorporated into the abstract concept of class. In such an approach, people within class categories may share common life experiences, but these experiences cannot be resolved analytically into the effects of class mechanisms and gender mechanisms in a coherent way, but are the effects of Clender mechanism per se. If, for those who believe that this is not likely to be a useful way of conceptualizing the complex relationship between class and gender, it becomes necessary at this level of abstraction to define class independently of gender and attempt to understand the interaction between them rather than combining them into a single unitary concept. The concept of Clender indicates the feminization of work that comes with the neoliberal transformation. This is important because employment in the post-Fordist economy has become increasingly service-oriented and dependent on gendered flexibility, networking, and emotional labor skills. This change is called the feminization of work. If we talk about the feminization of work today, we should start with the existence of reproductive labor exploitation. The feminization of work as wage labor in the workplace is subjected to at least 3 layers of exploitation by men and capital in the private sphere. All over the world, women work in labor-intensive fields and receive lower wages than men, even though they do the same job. Women who are less represented in managerial positions are exposed to mobbing, harassment, and violence. The concept of Clender emphasizes the relationship between class and gender. In the capitalist patriarchal system, production process, class experiences, and gender norms, patriarchal ideologies mutually shape each other.